Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my April wrap-up and sharing with you guys all the books that I read this month, my thoughts on them, and of course I will give them all a rating at the end. So, this month has been a particularly good reading month for me, and especially in terms of keeping up with my reading goals as well. I read 6 books this month, and I actually started a 7th like 2 days ago, but I didn't really get a chance to finish it yet, and I don't think I'm gonna finish it in time for this video anyway, so I just decided to cap it at 6, and that book will I'll just add it in next month. So yeah, without further ado, I am going to jump in and start sharing these reads with you guys. So the very first book that I read this month was something I've actually mentioned in one of my previous videos. The video I made about Indo-Caribbean literature, where I recommended 5 really good reads. This book was included in it. So if you saw that video, then you probably know, and that read is Jha G. So this was an anthology of Indo-Caribbean fiction, and there's a number of authors in this book, and then it was edited by Frank Birbalsingh, so that's why his name is on the front. But there was maybe, I think, 16 stories in this book, if I remember correctly. It was like the very first book that I started this month, like April 1st. But this was absolutely fantastic, and without a doubt I would recommend it to anybody who is of the Indo-Caribbean community, of course, and looking to just discover some new authors, as well as short stories that reflect our culture, our people, and our history. And that's something that I thought was done really well in this book. And the best thing about it as well was all of the authors included kind of ranged in generations. So there were authors from, I'd say, like our grandparents sort of generation, that age group, and then there were authors that came into like the newer age groups of, like, you know, the millennials, I guess you can say, or maybe a little bit before that. But there is a lot of diversity in the stories, and a lot of diversity in the topics that it deals with too. And what I really liked about the fact that they used authors from different generations is because every generation saw a different sort of change in the culture and in the way we've migrated. So at the end of the book, it was stories by some of the newer authors, and a lot of their stories dealt with Indo-Caribbean, kids who grew up in North America and have dealt with these weird, like, identity crisis and just feeling misplaced, where it's kind of like you're North American, but your parents are still very Caribbean, and you are Caribbean, but you don't fully have the culture the way your parents do, and it creates a whole thing. And then when you're in North America and like North American culture, people don't always understand our culture, our Indo-Caribbean culture, which I think a lot of people would agree with me on that one. But yeah, overall, that was one thing that I really liked about this above all else, and it was 5 stars for me, hands down, and I would highly recommend this to all of my Indo-Caribs who are watching this. The next book that I read is also by an Indo-Caribbean author, and this was also in my Indo-Caribbean recommendation video as well. So this is A Leaf in His Ear, and this is a collection of poetry by Mahadai. If you guys do not know her, I would again, like, just highly recommend that you look her up, read her poetry. One of her poems that is called They Came in Ships is a really popular poem, and I feel like even if you may not know her, you may know the poem. So definitely it's worth, like, looking into. Her poetry is so well written, first of all. The imagery that it brings to life, her choice of words, it's all very strong, and it's all very emotional as well. And she also, not in every single poem, but in some of them, she does talk about like some of the political climate and issues that went on in Guyana. And I mean, that still actually go on in Guyana today, but at the time, in, like, I think the 70s or 80s, when she had written some of these poems, it reflects that time period. And then of course, They Came in Ships is sort of it's just a really good piece of writing that just talks about how all of us essentially got to the Caribbean, not just the Indo-Caribbean community, but also the Afro-Caribbean community, because all of us got there on ships regardless. So it's such a like wonderful poem. And I think in the book Coolie Woman, if you guys have read it, and if you haven't, you absolutely like times 100 have to read it. I believe the author of that book, has used the a line or two of the poem in the book, or maybe more than that, if I remember correctly too, because I had read that like last summer. But that was where I had first for sure like seen Mahadai Das's poem. So this was also a 5-star read for me. If you are into poetry, then I think this would be really enjoyable. And even if you're not Indo-Caribbean, and you can definitely just appreciate the poetry, the language, the whole experience of just reading, you know, this style of poetry by you know, a female and a person of color at that. So definitely a 5-star for me as well. And 5 stars if you're into poetry. If you're not so into poetry, maybe you may not, I don't know, find it as like exciting to read, but if you are into poetry, then hands down it will be a really good read and really good to add to your collection as well. So next on my list, then I kind of got out of my Indo-Caribbean bubble and got into some more different pieces of fiction from other authors. So first and foremost, Toni Morrison, guys. Toni Morrison. She is so damn good. And if you don't agree with me, like, I don't even know, but she is so good. So I read The Bluest Eye, and I had this on my shelf for quite a while. I had gotten it like last year in a Buns bundle of books that I had traded for, and I finally read it. And this book, I can't even. I think like I teared up at one point. It's really emotional, and the way it's set is in I think it's around like maybe the 1940s or like 30s, that sort of time period, you know, in America. And then of course the main characters are all Black, so things are still segregated. There's of course racism as well, and the way the story is set up is it is told through the narration of a lot of the other characters throughout the book, and how they've all like linked through the story, and how they've all related back to this one main character whose name is Pecola Breedlove. So Pecola is a young Black girl. She's, I think, maybe like 10 or 11 years old, and she gets bullied a lot, just even by her own peers and even just other people in the community, because everyone is always referring to her as ugly, because she's very dark skinned. She doesn't have any really Eurocentric features, so everyone is always referring to her as very ugly. And the one thing that she wants more than anything in the world is to have blue eyes, because she feels like blue eyes is that standard of beauty and it will make her beautiful. And so one thing I will mention too is that this book does deal with some sensitive topics. Aside from what's been mentioned, it does deal with rape and what comes with it, so it can be a little touchy if maybe you are triggered by those things. But without a doubt, Toni Morrison is just an amazing writer, and her entire style and diction is fabulous. The way the story was told, it had you so gripped that you just don't want to put it down. So again, like this, actually, you know what I should say in general, this whole wrap up is pretty much all 5-star reads for me, to be honest, because I enjoyed all of these books and I flew through them as well, which is why I read so much this month. But The Bluest Eye was emotional. It was also it's almost like a reality check as well, you know what I mean? It touches on the fact, not even touches, it's like a theme of the book, the fact that like for a lot of people in the Black community, and even I think just as people of color, we might relate to this as well, that all these Eurocentric styles of not even styles, I should say, standards of beauty have really taken a toll on some of us, you know what I mean? Or if not, maybe majority of us, where we felt like we're not beautiful or we're not worthy or we're not, whatever the case is, because we don't have some of these features. We don't have, you know, very, very light skin, or we don't have the certain hair texture, or we don't have the eye color, or the small nose, or the small lips, or whatever the case may be. But all of these fall under that Eurocentric beauty style. And it's a very raw telling of everything. It's very honest, and I commend this book so much. It was fantastic. 5 stars, hands down. So the next one I read, also by another fantastic, iconic Black author, Maya Angelou. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. I've had this on my shelf forever, and I didn't realize I actually have 2 copies of this. This is like an old, like a very old like copy, and then over there, actually you can't even really see it, but up top there I have like a brand new copy that I had only bought a few years ago, like I think in my last year of high school or something. But I believe this was the first in her, so she had written like 7, I believe it was, books that were sort of autobiographical, and this was, I think, the first one, because this one started off with her and her brother like at like 3 and 4 years old, so like the beginning of their lives essentially. And this is from that point on until she was about 17 or 18, and her life through that point. So her parents had you know, not a great marriage, and it didn't work out. They sent her and her brother off to live with their father's mother in Arkansas, in a small town in Arkansas, and she grew up there. Then at one point, you know, her father came randomly like a few years later and picked up her and her brother, took them back to Los Angeles, where both of her parents lived, obviously in their separate lives, and they ended up living with the mother for a year, and it didn't work out too well. Again, trigger warning with this, because it does deal with rape, and rape of a child, just like the Bluest Eye did. So I just want to mention that in case those things are triggering to anybody. It's just something to keep in mind when you read these books. But that is, I don't want to spoil and give away like her whole life story, but it's basically her and her brother they did move around quite a bit between their parents and their grandmother, and ultimately they preferred living with their grandmother, or at least Maya did, I should say. And you know, they bounced around a lot, and from that experience of living in like a small southern town to them being in LA, it came with different experiences for her and for her brother alongside, and she's very, very close to her brother growing up as well, so he's a big part of her life in this too. And it was such a great telling, and I definitely want to read the other parts to see, because the way it ends off in this first one is she's given birth to her son. She had just randomly kind of decided she wanted to have sex with a boy in town, just kind of cuz, and she ended up getting pregnant and keeping the baby, you know, and that was it. So it ended off where she has like a 3-week-old baby. So I don't know much about her entire life story, so I would definitely like to read more of these. They were really, really great. So this was also a 5-star for me. Book I am so excited to talk about. Been dying to talk about it. Secret Daughter. So I finished this like middle of last week. It took me like 2 days to read it. This book, guys, there's a reason why it says Heather's pick on it, okay? I can't say enough good things about it. It's amazing. The writing is amazing. The description is amazing. The characters are so full of personality, full of honesty, and they're all so relatable. So basically, to sum it up, it balances, it goes back and forth, not balances, it goes back and forth between a mother in India and a mother in America, and then eventually the daughter. So there's a woman in India named Kavita who gives birth to her daughter, and because it's you know, a time, especially in India, where boys are in demand. People want to have sons, they don't really want to have daughters. Her husband is like, no, we can't do this. We can't afford dowries and things like that to have a daughter. We need a son to help us in the fields and all those things. So she already had one child prior, and he disposed of that baby the day it was born. And after seeing this daughter, she was like, absolutely not. Like, I'm not doing this. So instead of just allowing the child to be killed, her and her sister like just take the baby, get out of the hospital, and drop her off at an orphanage. So this way she still has a chance to have a life and not just be killed. In America, where there is this other mother who is a white lady who's married to an Indian man, they are struggling to have a child, and eventually they succumb to this struggle and decide that they are going to adopt a child. And this child ends up being the Indian woman, Kavita's baby, and you know, they get to go through the whole process of raising a child, and then eventually she, of course, will get curious about her Indian roots, and she wants to go back and find out more, and she does get the chance to go back through school to India and meet her father's family, and she feels so connected to this space. And there's so much other good parts wrapped into it, but I don't want to give it away because that will totally just ruin the story. But it is just such a good book, and this, like, I can't say enough good things about this. Like, you totally just, you have to read it. 5 stars, hands down. The very last book that I have is called Dollhouse. So this is a psychological thriller. Last book that I finished reading for this month, and this was so good. It was a bit of a slow start, and I didn't really know where things were going at first, but again, this deals with a couple who had to do IVF. They weren't able to have a baby, they were struggling, and then after their 3rd attempt, the girlfriend finally, her name is Corinne, she finally gets pregnant, and she starts finding little pieces of this dollhouse that her father had built for her and her sister when they were kids, in places in her life. She finds it like in her house, at her workplace, and it's popping up really weird. Her sister's getting strange phone calls, and there were a few parts in the book where, hands down, like I read late at night sometimes, and it was like 3 a.m, and straight up I was so freaked out. Like, I was I was genuinely freaked out by certain parts of this book. The story is very twisted, and it goes between a different character at certain parts, but it doesn't tell you who the character is. It just says then, and then it'll go back to the current day with the different characters and their stories, which is told through Corinne, the main character, her boyfriend Dominic, her sister, whose name is Ashley, and then this other mysterious character that we get to meet sort of as well. And then at the end it all unfolds. And to be honest, I really had no idea where it was going. Like, I totally didn't see the twist coming. I didn't see anything coming. So this was crazy. It was like, oh my god. At the end, I couldn't believe it. I was a bit iffy on the ending. The ending was, I felt like more was supposed to come, but I didn't get whatever more I was thinking was gonna come. But I think it leaves room that there's probably gonna be a sequel. I'm really hoping that there's a sequel. And yeah, for me, this one's gonna be a 4-star, just because bit of a slow beginning, and then the ending just has me like, okay, I don't know what's going on here. The story's not over with. Is there a sequel? Like, I don't know. It didn't quite satisfy me completely, but it was still a very good thriller, and I would still highly recommend it. That's it for me today. Those are the books that I read this month. Do let me know if you guys have read any of them. Let me know what you're reading coming up in May and whatnot. I'm probably going to do a to be read video for May, because I'm trying to structure things a little more for this month. In April, I kind of just went all over and picked anything and everything. So yeah, I will keep you guys updated. I'm still working on a few other things. I did mention a interview series with authors, and yeah, I will hopefully have that in the works soon. And that is it. I will see you guys next week. Bye.